Mr. Chairman, Ms. McCarthy, thank you for coming again today. 5 months ago, the EPA sent toxic sediment into a creek in Greensboro, Georgia. Initially, the EPA denied having anything to do with the project, but then later admitted that it funded the cleanup and the development operation that triggered the spill. Did you request a Department of Interior review for that spill?
I'm not directly aware of it, sir, so I will have to get back to you.
All right. The record indicates that you didn't. And it makes me wonder why after an accident like that you didn't stop all of these cleanup efforts, and particularly with the Gold King mine after having a spill in Georgia just a few months ago. Let me ask you this. You've been asked several times if anyone at EPA is going to lose their job over this incident. Has anyone at the Environmental Restoration LLC been fired or disciplined over this? And I think you may have answered that. Am I correct?
Not that I'm aware of.
Well, and am I correct in that you responded earlier that you're continuing to use them as a contractor?
That is correct.
Also, are you aware that it was reported that the EPA collected about 15,000 tons of poisonous waste from 2 Leadville mines in 2005 and dumped them down the shaft of the new Mikado mine without notifying the mine owner, who happens to be Mr. Hennis, who owns the Gold King mine, and that the EPA did not take responsibility for that and did not assist or pay for the cleanup?
I'm not aware of that incident, sir.
I think you need to look into that as well. One of the things that really concerns me about this, and I realize the EPA has a job to do, but I've brought this to your attention before about some of the heavy-handed tactics that the EPA engages in. And Chairman Bishop earlier in his questions talked about the fact that the EPA has clearly violated federal law, that it doesn't matter that the EPA didn't realize that they violated the law, or that the EPA didn't intend to violate the law, or that the EPA was just trying to do its job when it violated the law. That doesn't matter. And I'm saying it doesn't matter in the context of how you've treated other folks. I think Mr. Gosar brought up the case of Edward Hanasek. He was sentenced to 6 months in prison for discharging oil into a navigable stream. He was convicted despite the fact he was off duty and not present when the accident occurred. Lois Alt of West Virginia, she's a poultry farmer. The EPA spotted some feathers and droppings near her chicken houses. Now, having grown up on a farm, I'm fairly familiar with that. I think most people who've been around chicken farms would expect to see that. But they told her that she had to get a National Pollution Discharge Elimination System permit, or she'd be fined $37,500 a day. Miss Alt, true to her native West Virginia spirit, is fighting it. Andy Johnson from Wyoming has been mentioned. Mr. Johnson built a stock pond for his horses and cattle on his 8-acre property, a stock pond that a former Army Corps of Engineers enforcement officer inspected and concluded that it provided environmental benefits, including improved wildlife habitat, and that the water flowing out of the pond is 3 times cleaner than the water flowing into it, yet Mr. Johnson has been fined $16 million. Now, this is just a small farmer. Then you've got this situation with the Range Resources Corporation in Texas, a natural gas company, being forced to spend $4.2 million defending itself in 2011 after the EPA issued an emergency order. EPA accused the Range Resources of causing or contributing to the contamination of 2 water wells, and then when it was quickly determined that they didn't have anything to do with it, despite the incontrovertible evidence to this fact, the EPA claimed that it was not required to prove it, even allege any connection between Range Resources and the contamination. You were going to continue on that path to force them to pay that until you finally relented and gave that up. Yeah. You also turned over the personal data of 80,000 farmers to environmental groups. I don't understand why you can come before this committee and sit there and say that you're sorry for what you've done in the context of how you've treated private companies. you really ought to be sorry. Mr. Chairman, I yield.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Bishop. Secretary Flynn made the point that though the water levels rose, the plume moved downstream. When it receded and water levels returned to normal level, it left contaminated sediment. My question to the tribal leaders, Mr. Begay and Mr. Olguin, is does any of this impact any of the sacred places, places sacred to the Navajo Nation or to the Southern Ute tribes? Mr. Begay.
Thank you, Congressman Palmer. Pollen from corn is sacred to us. It is used for early morning prayers. It is used in ceremonies extensively. And by the corn maturing quicker, it has hurt the pollen from germinating, from maturing. And our people are very concerned that they're not going to have enough pollen for their ceremonies, for their morning prayers to be used in that way. And you have all of these plants that are medicine people use that grow along the river. Those are being tainted, and they are no longer wanting to gather these herbal plants that is used in ceremonies along the river. So yes, it has definitely damaged that part of our culture that is sacred to us.
Mr. Olguin.
Well, I would have to say that when we look at the Ute ancestors, I mean, those mountains were our homelands. So I think it starts right there. When the mining industry came about and we were removed from that area. Where we're located now, you know, the water is a sacred source of life for us. You know, water produces life. And that's one of the 8 rivers that crosses the reservation. And of course, we do have cultural sites along the river. We don't make those public by any means, but the people that live along the river, the tribal people, I mean.
There really isn't any way that you can put a price on the damage in that regard. Let me ask you this, and this question will go to the gentleman from Colorado and New Mexico as well, but I'll start back with Mr. Begay. Considering this in terms of your culture and what's sacred to you, if the EPA were to declare these Superfund sites, what would the long-term ramifications be in that regard?
Well, for us, they need to clean up the mines that are up there, because if it is not, and another blowout will occur, as we were told when we were standing alongside the person that actually was working the backhoe when the blowout occurred. He was saying there's other mines on the other side that's ready to blow out. And so we don't want that to occur again and again and again. And it will, if it does, it will really hurt our sacred areas, our sacred plants, and our people will be, their lives will be disrupted continuously.
Mr. Olguin.
Well, at this point, it's probably going to be hard for us to say, but I guess cleaning up the river, cleaning up the water, it is utmost importance.
Well, I would, I'll let Dr. Walk answer next, and I've got a final point, and we'll be out of here.
Just on the notion or the decision to make it a Superfund site, it's a little bit more complicated because the local community obviously has a very large voice in that, as well as the state. We have very successful examples of Superfund sites that have been restorative and have a sustainability plan now going forward. So it's certainly a viable option.
Mr. Flynn. Secretary Flynn.
Congressman, I think Superfund sites certainly have a place in environmental cleanup. However, I don't think that Superfund is really designed to solve all of the problems. In fact, when you have a responsible party who's doing work, I think Superfund adds levels of bureaucracy that can actually slow down environmental cleanup projects. So I think Superfund is most effective when there isn't a responsible party who is actually there doing cleanup work. We have 14 Superfunds in our state. It can be absolutely used effectively, but there's a huge fuel spill that we're cleaning up where we've avoided designated a Superfund site in our largest metropolitan area, and we've actually moved much faster by I don't think it would be appropriate to be a Superfund site, but we have a responsible party, and we've been able to get a lot more work done by not declaring it a Superfund site.
If the chairman indulges me just for a final statement here, my sense of this would be it would be beneficial to all of you to avoid a Superfund site because of what it's going to do in terms of people viewing your tourist sites, property values, and things of that nature. I think the most important thing is something Secretary Flynn touched on, and that in the previous hearing, Congressman Bruce Westman touched on, and that is making sure that whoever is dealing with the cleanup is qualified, that they have the engineering expertise, they have the technical expertise. You just don't send anybody out there with a backhoe to do this. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield the balance of my time.